What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Knights of the Nerds Table. I'm your host, EJ. Well, it finally happened. The Flash movie arrived in theaters, and along with its arrival comes the general DC drama that we come to know and love. With all the talk and discourse out there, I figured I would add my voice to the collection of Flash critics. So without further ado, here is a review of The Flash from a Zack Snyder fan's perspective. So if you're not plugged in, The Flash has been a movie that Snyder fans have been dreading for years. It's been rumored since almost 2018 that The Flash was supposed to be a somewhat of a reboot of the old DCEU, erasing old fan favorites like Henry Cavill's Superman and Ben Affleck's Batman. Walter Hamada was the head of DC at the time, and he planned to have everything lead up to a final Crisis story. How that was going to happen with the way his slate of films was going is anyone's guess, but that's where he claims he was leading up to. So the crowd that wanted to restore the Snyderverse wasn't too thrilled with the idea of not having our heroes around anymore. And when James Gunn took over DC in late 2022, it was once again announced that the movie was going to be used as somewhat of a reboot for his universe. So once again, Snyder fans felt a bit miffed. So, obviously, spoilers ahead, how was it? Well, the first thing you gotta realize when talking about The Flash is that it is the most busy DC movie since Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. BVS had to be a Superman sequel, a Batman origin story, a Justice League trailer, a Dark Knight Returns soft adaptation mixed with the Death of Superman adaptation, while also critiquing the real-life politics of humanity, culture, and government interactions with metahumans. The Flash has to be an origin story for Ezra Miller's Speedster, a multiverse story, a continuation of Keaton's Batman's arc, an introduction to Sasha Calle's Supergirl, a swan song for the Snyderverse, and at least a soft introduction to the Gunverse, all the while marketing it with a beleaguered star in a flaming out universe during a superhero fatigue era. Do all this and still be a movie. Yeah, Andy Muschietti had his work cut out for him. His bosses, James Gunn and David Zaslav, didn't help him much by hyping this movie as the best movie of all time, even though most people saw through the bullcrap. It was bound to be something. First of all, I will say there are 3 moments in this movie where they directly reference Zack Snyder's Justice League, which was quite the surprise. The first reference arrives in the form of a comment from Iris West, mentioning that she saw Barry a few years ago, maybe in a dream. That appears to be a direct reference to the time when Barry saved her from a car accident. That scene only appears in Zack Snyder's Justice League, as Kiersey Clemons' Iris doesn't show up at all in the theatrical cut in 2017. Another hint to the Snyderverse comes from Ben Affleck's Batman himself. When talking to Barry about potentially time traveling to the past, Bruce Wayne mentions it won't be just for a few seconds like they did in Russia. Barry's Oscar award-winning Into the Speed Force scene only appears in the Snyder Cut, another nod to the universe Snyder carefully built. The last reference is a blink and you'll miss it scene while Flash is in the Speed Force. You see Aquaman pointing his finger at the Flash in disgust, a scene that only happens in the Snyderverse. So besides the fact that Warner Bros. Discovery has fervently claimed that the theatrical version of Justice League is the only version that is canon, The Flash seemingly references the Snyder Cut over and over again, as if on purpose. So does that mean that the Snyderverse is canon? Well, there is an argument against that as well. The style of the Flash film, particularly the jokes and lighting, are more in line with the Justice League. They even repeat the Wonder Woman lasso of truth gag. It was even more cringeworthy this time than it was back in 2017. When Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman shows up, she is also wearing the brighter suit that is in Wonder Woman 1984 and Shazam, seemingly tying itself to the old Justice League universe. My theory is that as James Gunn is tying up this universe, he's purposely making this film in a way that is canon to both the Snyder Cut and Justice League. These hints can lean into that while really not making any long-term commitments. Of course, now that The Flash is out, we see that this so-called best superhero film of all time was basically a smokescreen for a movie that had a lot of reasons not to succeed. And although it has its charms, Ezra Miller, Keaton, and Sasha Calle give it their all, the movie is overall a disappointment. The story, inspired by the Flashpoint storyline, lacks the punch of the original Flashpoint. We certainly missed out on a Jeffrey Dean Morgan-led alternate version of Batman, and this movie should have been a more faithful adaptation to the older storyline. This movie was supposed to be a celebration of DC, but it's instead a reminder of how empty the DC bench really is. The majority of the cameos were CGI versions of these characters that this generation doesn't really know much about, besides Christopher Reeves of course. Very few people knew or cared about George Reeves' Superman, or really get the joke as to why Nicolas Cage is Superman. Most of the prominent DC bench has either passed away or has been spurned by Warner Bros., like Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck. It's so sad to see DC in this confusing and unclear state. The one cameo that would have made sense, they didn't even do. It is outright inexcusable not to include Grant Gustin's CW Flash as a cameo in this movie. Not even a reference of Ezra Miller's cameo in the CW show. It didn't have to go full No Way Home style, but if they had some glimpse of John Wesley Shipp and Grant Gustin, that would just fit so well and make so much sense. In fact, screw it. If it was me making the movie, obviously, big spoiler again, but I would have had Barry go back in time and fail to change the results of Bat Keaton and Sasha Calle's death over and over again, and while he's losing himself and going crazy, a hand would touch his shoulder. Camera turns, and boom, there's Grant and Shipp's Flash. They give him the emotional spiel of not being able to change the past, and then Barry does the right thing and says goodbye to his mother. That way, the two Flash serve a role similar to that of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. They could have tied this all together and be mentors to the new Flash. At least that way, the cameo makes sense instead of this poor man's version of the Avengers portal scene that we saw for really no good reason. But to sum it out, Zack Snyder's Justice League may be canon to The Flash, but The Flash is still a bad movie that failed to meet expectations at the box office and for fans. Let it crash and burn at the box office like it richly deserves, and watch it on Max in a few months just for laughs. When looking back on this film, the most disappointing thing about it is that this movie contains none of the best moments of Ezra Miller's Flash. Nothing in this film tops the Flash running into the Speed Force at the speed of sound, or breaking glass and saving Iris. Both moments were from Zack Snyder's Justice League. So when I think of a proper send-off for the Flash, his super friends, and the Snyderverse as a whole, I will just sit down and watch my Blu-ray version of the Snyder Cut. The Age of Heroes is best enjoyed when served by Zack Snyder. Thanks for joining me, Night Out. Oh, and one more thing. Warner Brothers reportedly said that the Snyder Cut was unwatchable, and it ended up being pretty good once we actually released it and the fans saw it. Warner Brothers has also said for the better part of this year that the Flash movie is one of the greatest superhero films of all time, and no one agreed that that was the case. So I guess if there's one thing that is consistent, it's that Warner Brothers never understands their audience.